Okay, you're on.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Bible study. Hope we got some people joining in with Vashti and I. We don't want to be here all by ourselves. You got anybody aboard?
One so far.
Okay, well that's one more than we had when we got here.
This is barely came on.
But anyway, we're going to be in Judges chapter 16 tonight. We're only going to do one chapter tonight. We're going to do Judges 16, and not sure how fast we're going to go, but there's not too many people here to discuss it with me. And so you're going to only hear what I have to say and not what you have to say. So if you want to get involved in the Bible study, you're going to have to come over here. Anyway, Judges chapter 16, and this will be Samson's swan song. This will be the end of the strong man with a weak spirit. Weak spiritual spirit, I should say. So if you'll open your Bibles to Judges chapter 1, verse 1, we will start in here with verse 1 of chapter 16. I titled these first few verses, The Desires of Samson. And that's referring to his fleshly desires, his sensual desires. Samson was definitely a human being when it comes to human nature. Then went Samson to Gaza, and saw there an harlot, and went in unto her. And we read this verse, and my goodness, what's a man of God doing going to a place like this? You know, here's a man born a Nazarite, called by God, ordained by God, empowered by God, greatly used by God, from godly parents, and he reduces himself to go into a house of ill repute. Says there was a harlot, and he went in unto her. And it was told the Gazites. Now, if you could picture the map, Mediterranean Sea over here, Dan's up here, Philistia's down here, and Gaza is down here in the land of Philistia. So it's all right along the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. And when we get to the Valley of Sorek, we're going to find out that he had to go through the Valley of Sorek to get from Dan down to Gaza. Evidently, Samson made this journey several times during his 20 years as judge, because it seemed like nearly all of his dealings was with the Philistine people, except for that one little exception of which he had with the people of Judah. It was told the Gazites, saying, Samson has come hither. And they compassed him in and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all night, saying, in the morning when it is day, we shall kill him. So obviously this is a walled city, and so they simply close the gates and says, we've got him. When he tries to go out, we're going to get him. And which, made good sense. Instead of having to go look for him, all they got to do is sit and wait for him to come to them when he tries to get outside the walls. Verse 3, and Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and he took the doors of the gates of the city, and the two posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of a hill that is before Hebron. Some interesting things here. First of all, when you think gates, think big. This is not a gate going out to your flower garden. This is not a gate that you open to let the cows in. These gates are big gates intended to keep the enemy out of the city. So we're talking about gates that maybe are 16, 18 feet high. And we're talking about gates that probably weighed several hundred pounds. And it seems to me like this is a double gate, two gates that would open. Many of them were. And then evidently it was a bar that locked them together, because he took the gates, the post that held them, the bar that locked them, and took off with them. Now, another interesting thing is here, where did he go with them? Okay, he's in Gaza, down on the Mediterranean Sea in the southern part of the land of the Philistines, and he's going to carry them all the way to a hill just outside of Hebron. Well, my curiosity got the best of me, so I got out a map. And the best I can figure, it was 40 miles from Gaza to Hebron. Now remember, Hebron is the place where Abraham lived most of his years. And so we're getting a look at just how strong this guy really was to carry those humongous gates 40 miles and set them down on a hill. I guess he was going to see if he could put them in his garage sale and get a little money for them and sell them to the people in the tribe of Judah, because Hebron was in the tribe of Judah. Okay, now we're going to move on to Samson's third woman. Now, these are the only ones that are named. Samson may have had other women that the record doesn't tell us about. Evidently, Samson never got married, and evidently he was a very carnal man. And so we would probably assume that this is not his first encounter with other women. We would have to say Samson was a womanizer. And yet, he still is a man of God. By the way, don't use that as an excuse to be a womanizer just because you're a man of God, all right? Verse 4, and it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Now, the first woman wasn't named, nor was the other woman that he fell in love with. But here's Delilah, and she is named, and she lives in the valley of Sorek. Now, Sorek, as I mentioned, is between Gaza and Dan, somewhere along the Mediterranean Sea, and it seemed to be the main route going from north and south, back and forth, all along the Mediterranean Sea there, the valley of Sorek. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and said unto her, entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we will give thee, every one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver. 1,100 pieces of silver. Jesus only brought 30. And this is 1,100 from each one of these Philistine lords. Now, there was 5 states in the land of Philistia. I can't name them all now, but I know Gaza's one because we just talked about it. But Gaza and Ekron, well, I'm not thinking of them. Anyway, there was 5 of these, so we're probably looking at 5 lords of the Philistines. Each one producing 1,100 pieces of silver. We're talking 5,500 pieces of silver. And that's just a little bit more than poor old Delilah can stand. She's never seen that much money before. So they enticed her, or told her to entice him, to tell him the source of his great strength. And you wonder, in all her questioning, he never told her the true source of his great strength. He told her 4 lies. Because the fourth one really was not the source of his great strength. What was the source of his great strength? It's God. It was God. It wasn't his hair. But the hair was the symbol of his Nazirite vow. And because of his Nazirite vow, God had given him that extraordinary strength. And so Samson missed a wonderful chance to tell these heathen Philistines about his God. Now, again, Samson, remember, is for a Nazirite, he's still a very worldly man. The fact is, I'm not sure we can call him a Nazirite. He broke his vow on many occasions, his Nazirite vow. Verse 6. And Delilah said to Samson, tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. Now, red flags should have gone flashing all over the place with a question like that. How can I defeat you? How can my people bind you and afflict you? And Samson was, I guess he was overcome by the desire for this woman. And he didn't see the red flags that should have been flashing at him about that. But you also got to remember, this was God's plan. Even though Samson fulfilled God's plan in a very worldly way, but yet it was God's plan for Samson to defeat these Philistines as their judge. Verse 7, and Samson said unto her, if thou bind me with 7 green withs. Now, I have no idea what a withe is. Does your Bible say, honey?
I don't know.
Because somebody, anyway, a withe evidently is something that you can tie something with. But anyway, it says, if I bind me with 7 green withs that have never been dried, then shall I be weak and be as another man. Okay, now Vasha's finally going to break out her Bible. She's been watching for more people coming in on the internet. If you got some more,
I can't get it to come up on Facebook, but it is on YouTube.
Okay.
Ismail was looking for it on Zoom.
No, we've not given up on Zoom.
Judges what now?
Judges 16, verse 7.
If I can find it.
Did Ishmael ever make it in?
I don't know. 16:7.
16:7.
Cord, fresh cord, it says.
No, cords, all right.
They bind me with 7 fresh cords that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like.
Well, that's later on. He's going to be bound with ropes. So that's basically the same thing: cords and ropes.
Bowstrings here it says.
Oh, bowstrings. Okay.
Well, in here it says fresh cords, and down here it says bowstrings.
Okay, that's the identifying it. Yeah, defining it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's probably right because it's the difference between rope and widths.
Cat.
Well, they're usually made out of some kind of animal parts, and they said they had to be green, right? The idea of green, by the way, if you tied them and then they dry and shrink, and it'd be very painful. So, but anyway, that's why he told her to tie her with the 7 green wrists that have not been dried. Then shall I be weak and be as another man. I'll become like humans. And then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs, which had never been dried, and she bound him with them. Now there were men lying in wait, verse 9, abiding with her in the chamber. They were hiding in the room. And she said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he brake the withs as a thread of tow is broken when it touches the fire. So his strength was not known. So his secret is still safe. But he lied to her, didn't he? And, I guess he lied to her because he suspicioned what she had in mind. And so he decided it's best not to tell her the truth because as far as Samson was concerned, the secret of his strength was in his hair because that was a sign of his relationship with God through the Nazirite vow. So we're going down to Samson's second deception. That was his first deception. His second deception is verse 10 through 12. Verse 10. And Delilah said unto Samson, Behold, thou hast mocked me. You're making fun of me. And told me lies. That's true. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thy mouth be bound. Red flags, flashing fires. And yet Samson, he sort of understands what she's trying to pull. And otherwise he wouldn't be lying to her like this. Verse 11. And he said unto her, If thou bind me fast with new ropes that have never were occupied, then shall I be weak and be as another man. Delilah therefore took new ropes, bound him therewith, and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And there were liars in wait, abiding in a chamber, and he brake them from off his hands like a thread. So now this is 2 times she's deceived him. Now remember, there's an old saying, if you fool me once, shame on you. If you fool me twice, shame on me. So now we can say, shame on Samson. He's let this woman pull the wool over his eyes twice. But even 3 times is not good enough for him. Verse 13, this is his third deception. By the way, each one of these deceptions has the same little outline. Delilah's plea, Samson's ploy or lie, and Samson's proving that he overcomes whatever the obstacle was. Verse 13, and Delilah said unto Samson, Hitherto thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If thou weavest the 7 locks of my hair into the web. Now the web is referring to a part of a loom for weaving. And I think it's the part that moves back and forth. And or is that the shuttle? That's probably the shuttle. But the web is maybe the part where the threads all go through. But anyway, so he told her, says, okay, if you braid my hair into these into this loom, he says, I'll still be as weak as another man. And she fastened it with the pin and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he waked out of his sleep and went away with the pin of the beam and with the web. So he walked out with this stuff still hanging in his hair. Walked out with a loom and the shuttle and the web, the whole shooting match. Can you imagine him walking around carrying that thing hanging on there? Because that'd probably hurt your hair, all that extra weight hanging on it. So that was his third deception. So here we go for a fourth one. Here's Samuel's fourth deception, which is verses 15 down to 20. And she said unto him, How canst thou say I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death, that he told her all his heart, and said unto her, There hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go forth from me, and I shall become weak and be like all other men. Now, I personally believe that Samson did not really believe he was going to lose his strength when he lost his hair. Because, we're going to see that after this happens, he's just going to say, well, I'm just going to go ahead and do like I have been doing. And I'm just going to go ahead and get up, walk away without my hair, and I'll beat my way out of this place. But what happened? And anyway, we'll see, I think it's in verse 20 that tells us what happened. Verse 18. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, Come up this once, for he has showed me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and brought money in their hand. There it is, 5,500 pieces of silver. And by the way, she asked, she said to Samson, how can you say I love you when you keep pulling my leg? And he could say back to her, how you keep saying I love you when you keep trying to deceive me and get me taken in by the Philistines. But maybe he didn't care whether she loved him or not. Samson was not looking for a happy, loving marriage. He was looking for a worldly marriage. A lot of people today are looking for a worldly marriage. All they're looking for is how much pleasure can I get out of this? And that's why the marriages don't last, because they're built on pleasure. A lot of guys. And that's why the marriages don't last, because they're built on pleasure. Am I talking? Am I talking to myself?
Yeah.
Now what's gone wrong?
I messed it up.
Am I talking to myself?
Yeah, just keep on.
What's gone wrong?
Well, I was trying to get it. All right.
Okay, we're gonna try again.
Yeah.
I've known a lot of guys that, oh man, they wait around until they can finally get them a good looking check. I've known a lot of guys that, oh man, what on earth is wrong with that thing? They wait around until they can finally get them a good looking check. What on earth is wrong with that thing?
I told it to go to YouTube and it was already on YouTube. I don't know.
Anybody out there still?
Oh yeah, there's 5 people.
Are they hearing me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep on going even though I have to listen to myself. But, these guys go out and get them a good-looking chick, and they're so thrilled with her. But then they forget one thing. When she gets to be 70 years old, she's not going to look quite like she did when she was 23. But if you really love a woman, she's going to look as good to you when she's 75 as she did when she was 25. Because the love is not physical. It's, shall we say, soulish or spiritual. And it's based upon character and not upon the shape of the body. Okay? Because let's face it, most of our bodies may not look quite as good as they did when we were 25. Thinking for myself strictly. Verse 19.
Oh, here we go again. Sorry.
And she made him sleep upon her knees. And she called for a man. And she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. I guess that meant he had his hair in 7 braids. I don't know. And she began to afflict him. Notice, she began to afflict him. She decided to test him. She decided to test him before she called the Lord's back in again. She decided to afflict him, and his strength went from him.
Sorry.
Verse 20. And she said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times before. Samson did not realize that God, who was supposed to be strength, had turned away from him. He's going to say, I'll shake myself, and he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. And I think we can find a principle here. Sometimes we set out to do something that we think we're doing for the Lord, and we don't realize it because of some sin in our life, that the Lord is not with us until we've confessed that sin. That's why it's very important to keep confessed up. Verse 21. But the Philistines took him, put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza, which is where he was earlier, and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Now, it's not told how long there was between this chapter 14 and the chapter 16. We're not told how long Samson worked in this mill, grinding grain. And, we think, well, maybe it was only a few days, but maybe it was 2 or 3 years. We don't know how long he was reduced to this very low position in his life. We see the death of Samson in verses 21 down through 31. Verse 22. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. Now again, don't let this fool you. His strength comes from God. It does not come from the length of his hair. The length of his hair is strictly a sign, just like baptism is a sign to us of our relationship with Jesus Christ. It is not our source of salvation. It is a sign of our salvation. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon. Now Dagon was a fish with a man's head on it. And anyway, this fish stood up right on his tail. And we'll run across Dagon again over in 1 Samuel when the Philistines capture the ark, and they bring the ark and put it in front of their god Dagon, and then they all go back to home for the night, and they come back the next morning, and what happened? Dagon was down on his face before the ark of God. Dagon was worshiping the symbol of God's presence. And so that's where we get another view of Dagon, the god of the Philistines. Verse 24. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. Now, this doesn't sit good with God. They were crediting their God with their victory over Samson. And like I say, that doesn't sit good with God, because that victory that Dagon got wasn't his, it was God's. God was the one that allowed them to take Samson. He's the destroyer of our country, and which slew many of us. And we know he slew 1,000 at one time, and a bunch of others at another time. Well, one time he slew 30, and then he slew some others. And this time he's going to really up that number to a couple of thousand. Verse 25. And it came to pass when their hearts were merry, in other words, they were drinking and having a good time, that they said, call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between the pillars. Now, I'm not sure we really know what sport means here. Does yours say?
That will be amused.
Okay, well, in other words, they were going to insult him and make fun of him and ridicule him and laugh at him and say, oh, yeah, the mighty man of Dan, he can't see all he's good for is grinding grain. And so they're going to use him as a object of ridicule. And it came to pass when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson that we may make sport. And called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between the pillars. Now you need to understand, this temple had two main pillars that held up the whole roof. And the roof was kind of like a seating area for an arena. And a lot of people, a couple of thousand people, were up on this roof that was held by these two pillars. And so anyway, they tied him between these pillars, and they were making fun of him. Probably they had him out in the arena earlier, and they were making fun of him. Now they had a little boy taking care of him, I guess, to lead him. And they laid him back and tied him between these pillars. And Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. So this poor boy didn't know any better. He did what Samson asked him to do. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there was upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld while Samson made sport. So that was kind of a sporting arena, kind of like the, what they call that thing that the Romans had? Colosseum. The Romans had this big Colosseum where they had people make sport, and they all sit around and laugh. And these people were all laughing at Samson. Verse 28. Now look at this. Now, what God has put Samson through has worked. You know, a lot of times God puts people through terrible times to bring them to their knees, to prayer, and to repentance. Okay, look what happens to Samson. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my two eyes. Now, Samson is still looking for revenge. Now, God is judging the Philistines, and he's using Samson to do it. But Samson is still, he's not saying, well, God, I really love these people, but I'm going to destroy them because you want me to. No, he's destroying them because he hates them. Okay? Because they poked out his eyes. And Samson took hold of the two middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up, of the one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might. And the house fell upon the lords and of all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. So here he kills 3,000 people in this one moment. You know, we think that Samson's death is a tragic thing. But you know what? Samson never had a problem with lust after that. You know, all through Samson's life, we saw that he had a womanizing problem. But when that building fell, Samson never had a problem with womanizing again. Right? Okay. He never had a problem with feeling bad or anything. And Samson had reached perfection, finally. It took him a lifetime to do it. But he finally reached perfection. And verse 31, then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the burying place of Manoah, his father, and he judged Israel 20 years. Oh, mine just says he judged Israel 20 years. Okay, he had judged Israel 20 years. And whichever. Anyway, it's past tense. Now, let's stop and think a minute. Okay, Samson, if we compare Samson to Jesus, okay, Samson operated out of hatred for the Philistines. Jesus operated out of love. Samson's parents received a promise from the angel that Samson would be born and would be a Nazarite. Jesus' parents received a promise from the angel that Jesus would be born. They didn't say he'd be a Nazarite, but they said he'd be the Savior of his people. I'm trying to think of some more compare. Samson sold for 5,500 pieces of silver. Jesus sold for 30. Samson died in a moment of anger. Jesus died in a moment of love. Jesus spread out his arms on the cross. Samson spread out his arms between the two pillars. Can you think of any other contrasts and comparisons? And, just you think about the, and again, you got to remember though, Samson was still being used of God in spite of his horrible character failures. And God used them for his purpose and benefit. And we're through early.
Physical strength and spiritual strength.
Let me look back here and see if there's anything else I wanted to remember to mention. Oh my goodness. We got that sounds like something from outer space.
Okay.
But Samson is deserted because of his failures to honor God in his lifestyle. And a lot of well-meaning believers lose their power with God because of their failures to discipline their behavior. And none of us can come out and say, well, we've accomplished a perfect life, because we haven't. We have our failures. But again, the secret to it is we confess to God and get forgiven and get back on his good terms again. And then he doesn't have to discipline us so harshly. Now, he still disciplines us, but not punitive. Once he's forgiven a sin, he doesn't give us punitive punishment, but he still disciplines us to make a better person out of us. So if you think that you're suffering because of some sin you did, but it's a sin you've confessed, then that's not the case. Your suffering is there for your benefit, not for punitive punishment. That's my opinion. Not everyone will agree with me. I'm tired of listening to myself talk.
I'm sorry. And I don't know how to do that cancellation either.
Oh boy, I just turned it off. Well, let me pray